So last week we looked at Ophiel as we looked at the Magician card. Let's look at PHUL and the Olympic planetary spirits. So we're going to wrap up today's lecture with a glimpse at one of my first Olympic operations back in the day. This was 29th of July, 1998. Oh, first let me, I was going to give you a brief synopsis of PHUL, just so that you have an idea of what this spirit's about before I tell you what my experience was. So it says he changes all metals into silver, governs lunar things, cures edema, dropsy, gives spirits of the water, so familiars and other things, undines, and which serves people in physical and visible forms and makes one live 300 years. The most general teachings of this secret: 1, each governor acts with all of his spirits, at other times naturally, always, of course, in the same manner, otherwise out of his own free will, if God doesn't prevent it. 2, each can produce anything, which in nature takes a long time, but these spirits can do it in a short time, so they can just produce magical metals like that right in front of you. The true and divine Magus is able to use all creatures of God and the services of the governors of the world according to his command. For that reason, these governors of the world obey and come when called upon and carry out their orders, but not without God's authority, as Joshua caused the sun to stand still in the sky. With average magi, the governors will send some of their spirits who will obey within certain limits. But they will not listen to false magi, but will throw them out into the jaws of the mocking demons and expose them to different dangers with God's authority, as the Jews were, as testified in Jeremiah chapter 8. I know, right? Some of this classical stuff is just so dramatic. It's hard not to smile a bit. In all the elements, there are 7 governors with their armies having the same movement as the firmaments, and the inferiors always depend on the superiors, as taught in the book Philosophy of Grace, which is perhaps a book published by Paracelsus, but lost as far as we know, I think. 5, a person who is a true magus is born to magic from his mother's womb. Others who introduce themselves to this office are ineffective. Concerning this, John the Baptist says no one receives anything unless it is given to him from above. So really in this grimoire, magic is all through God's authority. And that, of course, allows the magician to say, well, it wasn't God's will that this should happen. So this takes us back to the deterministic predestinationism of Calvinist thought. Any character given by a spirit, whatever the reason, is effective for the thing for which it is given in the determined time. It must be used within the planetary hour and day to which it belongs. I referenced that earlier, so these spirits will give sigils or seals or charms for getting what you want, or getting rulers and leaders of the land to come when they're called. Wouldn't that be nice? 7, God lives and your soul lives, so you must keep the agreement which you have with the spirit, the revealer of God. Then everything will happen which the spirit promises you. I think that's actually where you really see this grimoire come alive and deliver its primary message. It's this idea that we see in later magical orders, where spirits you might be able to manipulate matter and nature and reality a little bit with the help of spirits and such things, but the really greatest magic comes from being in alignment with your great spirit, your true will or true self, or the guardian angels of you, or just God, just being aligned with God. That idea is so deeply connected in the ARBATEL that maybe that's how it justifies making its great promises, right? Like, oh, you would live 300 years if God wanted you to. I don't know. I'll let you know when I surpass 120 years. So this was a fun operation. Not sure how fun it actually was, but it was every day was another ritual back then. And this was during a waxing moon in July at Temple Tahuti. So we went into the temple. We were all getting ready for a road trip down to California, and we had a bunch of foreign members here. We had some of our Swedish members from the Swedish temple. Says I put on my robe and nemes, 3 Swedish members, which were 2 Fraters and 1 Sor. I have that listed in my diary. That's good note taking. 1, the Swedish Sor performed the LBRP, and her voice was very melodious. there was power. So she did a good job. Of course, in retrospect, probably should have done the LIRP or done an LIRP afterwards. But given what this operation was, if you were just going to do an Olympic planetary spirit working, I would start with just an LIRP, not an LBRP. But given we were doing a major operation here, sort of, it makes sense to banish, especially if you've just been traveling and have the distractions of the day upon you. So to the next Swede, Marcus. Some of these people are still been around in magic, I think, are still out there in Sweden doing the work. He performed a banishing ritual, the hexagram. Also, he performed beautifully his rituals. 3, we prayed to the Lord of the universe. We performed an advanced middle pillar, which is just a regular middle pillar, but instead of using divine white brilliance, which I still think is better to use, you can visualize them, the sphera, in the queen scale color. There's lots of tweaks you can make to the middle pillar exercise, of course. Invoking ritual of water. A lesser invoking ritual of water is suggested I should. This is the adept who is leading us through the ritual, very out of Frater AMO. And he asked me to do it. I declined. And then I there performed the elemental grade opening of water. So this is opening a watchtower using the ENOCHIAN and the methodology as presented in the beginning of each of the initiations in the Golden Dawn book. You can actually do it straight from the book if you use an older edition that has the gestures and symbols. The new 7th edition removed all the symbols that you need to do to make the initiations work. God knows why. So perform the elemental grade opening of water. And there's also a demonstration on our website of me doing it exactly how I still do it today. And with the chalice and aspergillum, sprinkling water around the hall, and those present, this was the very first time to see such work. So they had never been in a full temple before, just in their sanctuary in Sweden. So we pulled out the bells and whistles, and it was an honor to show it to them. The 2 practici had also never scribed before. So this was, I was in practicus at this time. I was 17 at this time, and working with these 2 other practici from Sweden who had never scribed. So we thought, let's do a scrying operation. Honored Frater SI, so he's was the brother of AMO, and he had a podcast in Sweden, I think, for a while. Had never done Olympic planetary spirits. I had never done PHUL, so it was also new for me. We sat before the altar and invoked the energies, i.e. the intelligence of the moon, and we're scrying. And this is what I saw. I saw a man in a white robe holding a white crystal ball, and said it was a gift for me. I asked what I should use it for. He answered, I will reflect the image of the mind through the gateway of Yesod. I said this was great, but how shall I access it, the gateway? The angel answered, through its dark Lord PHUL. So it calls PHUL a dark Lord, who dwells in the depths of Levanah, the moon, in the densest places of Yesod. The vision then became hazy. Then the last thing I got was this line, this idea, all secrets shall be revealed. I called to PHUL. When I had opened the portal, he came in. He came, a man with pan-like qualities. And I find that very interesting because at the time, again, the amount of information we had on the Olympic planetary spirits in the late 90s was just from the 4th book of occult philosophy. That was it. So it was errorful and undeveloped and without too much context, because again, you got to remember our general understanding of grimoire magic back then was much less than it is today. So what's interesting though is he had these pan-like Greek god qualities, which was surprising to me because I expect things to be more angelic, especially in such a Christian grimoire. But this tracks with what people like Farrell have found, with what Nick Farrell and other magicians have found, that there are that the Olympic planetary spirits might be a way to actually just access all the gods, all the pagan gods as spirits. And so that's kind of an interesting parallel. So that is to say, a brown beard, a deep purple robe, mountains or caverns surrounded him. I asked, what are the secrets you can teach me? Obviously, always a good question to ask. He replied, I can show you how to control another's lust and your own. And that, at that moment, my Yesod sphere became infused with what he spoke of, therefore lust. I declared to him, and I said that I came in the divine name of Yah. So I wasn't sure if this is a time to test a spirit when it says something like that. I felt at the time, it's like, I've come here to teach you to control people's lust, including your own. That's actually a good thing to hear. Yeah, when you're 17 and you're a virgin, you're a little more sensitive to sexuality that you've not yet experienced. It's like, maybe I should pull the tetragrammaton and test this spirit to see how clean and pure it is. And so I said in the divine name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, I desired only knowledge of the secret virtues of Yesod, which is actually, I'm sort of impressed with my younger self at that. That's quite, way to go, kid. That's the way to do it. He then said humbly that the waters of Yesod create a realm of friendship and rapport. I don't recall the other word he used, a foundation. I then asked PHUL about jealousy. He said it was the seed of Netzach, green. And this is all very interesting, of course, because PHUL is the moon in Yesod, not Netzach, but there's, of course, an intimate relationship between the two, the moon and Venus especially. Through it comes Netzach. It must work through Yesod to affect the moon. I asked, then how may I stop it? What happens and how can I purify it in Yesod? PHUL said, if you stop it, it only lingers in Netzach. So your desire, I guess, your lust would linger in desire rather than become part of the foundational prana or kundalini or spiritual force, the nefesh, that fuels the human life force, the ruach. And you must transform it in Yesod by the love of Keter. That makes sense. It must be alchemically distilled in the water of Yesod. Moreover, Tiferet can purify jealousy because jealousy has its root in Tiferet. It is love that is stagnant and becomes jealousy in Netzach. The energy all this while was very restrained, and I did not have the intense feeling I usually do when working with Olympic planetary spirits. I believe this to be the result of better preparations and better invocations and other things aforementioned. However, by the end of my questioning, PHUL was beginning to get through to me and became an intense pressure in my eyes and forehead. I pushed it away with my left hand and banished it several times with my right middle finger. The other Frater with whom I was scrying have finished their scribe work. And so, yeah, you can see my writing was getting quite frantic toward the end just to get it all done. And finally, I closed the grade opening and gave the final release in Latin, which I now realize I have also memorized. So this is the entry in which I first, went to do something I always had to read out of my diary. And I was like, oh, I got it down in my memory now. That's always a happy day. And it's always cute to see those little details mentioned in your diary. So, yeah. Then the other practica I banished, and we did adorations, and that was that operation. The next day, it looks like I was in California doing tattoo work. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that little glimpse into my magical past and what was my first time operating with this Olympic planetary spirit PHUL. Last week, of course, we discussed and compared two different operational methodologies for working with Olympic planetary spirits. So you can apply those, of course, to working with PHUL if you want to give that a try. We compared Nick Farrell's rather basic method with Frater Acker's slightly more involved Trithemian method. But again, there's lots of room to move in between those two things. And as we know from the ARBATEL, one of the key features of it is that it doesn't really have these strict grimoire requirements like other things. Rather, it focuses on the importance of faith and good Christian values. So thank you for attending. We will stop the recording now for our little Q&A discussion.